right. Well, thanks, Jason. And again, I do want to say, first a quick shout out to DMI and the bid. We recognize that we have some tools, but the city doesn't control all the tools, and it takes it takes a lot of people to make a really great spot, right? When you think about what brings people to there, it's not necessarily about putting a bench or putting a planter. It's about creating an environment that makes people want to come to downtown. And that's super important. And that's not something that we can do by ourselves as a city. Um, so let me share my screen really quick. And we can get started. And again, my name is Dan McAuliffe. I'm a planner, working on, I do staff the Downtown Coordinating Committee, and we'll be working with Rebecca Kinnear and Bill on our upcoming downtown plan update, but that might not be for a year or two. So before we jump in, I want to talk a little bit about the history of State Street and kind of how we got to where we are now. First, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me okay and can see the share, and I'm not accidentally sharing my speaker notes or anything like that.
No, no, you're good, and it's in the perfect format.
Perfect, thank you.
Been
Um,
there though.
yes. Sometimes we learn the hard way, and
Yeah, like an hour into a presentation, I did that once. Yeah, that was
yeah.
good. Yeah.
Sometimes people can be a little too polite, and so State Street's gone through a lot of evolutions. The top right image is what State Street looked like kind of back in the 60s. And sometimes it's easy to forget that State Street used to be one of the city's main commercial drags, full of all things that were commercial drags in the 30s through the 60s. So um, quick show of hands, does anybody know that there used to be a Sears Roebuck on State Street? It's in the 300 block. It's pretty cool, right? It's really interesting how that particular business evolved, and its course in Madison is kind of replicating the larger history of retail and kind of the experiential change that we see in a lot of our downtown. So starting in the 60s, there was a pilot on the 700 and 800 blocks to make State Street only pedestrian. That actually was initially met with resistance from a lot of the elected officials. We moved forward with a early reconstruct, which you can kind of see in the lower left. That was kind of heavy. It was brick. It wasn't really flexible. Like if you think about our needs as a space, as a city, it's dynamic. It changes very frequently. And when you put in a lot of permanence, sometimes you get it right, but a lot of times you get it wrong, and it's not inflexible. So in our 2000 reconstruct is kind of what we see today. Um, it's a lot more flexible. It's a lot more open, and really thinking about how we can really leverage that physical attribute to the space to make it a more active place for everybody. This kind of evolved into a more permanent or a temporary closure that we saw during COVID. The city was looking at anything we could do to bring people into the downtown in 2020. 2020 was a very different time with COVID, with the protests, and you can see how successful this experiment was. We effectively put barricades at the end of the street, but a lot of people weren't coming. But I think, there's definitely lessons learned from this. And the one thing that I think one of the big reasons why we didn't try to do anything in 2013 or 2023 for the closure after Metro stopped is we wanted to take a little bit more thoughtful approach and not just put up barricades at the end of the street and say this is going to be great, right? Because we have the time. Let's put some resources. Let's think through some of these issues and come to a better solution. So as I briefly mentioned, one of the main reasons that we are able to do this experiment is the Metro Transit redesign that pulled transit off the 400, 500, 600 blocks. It's not that we didn't want to serve those areas with transit. There was additional conflicts, and we've just felt, or Metro staff felt, that the better network design was to move transit off state onto largely Johnson and Johnson Gorman there. If anybody's ever tried to go through on the bus at State Street and Lake, you know how time consuming that can be. So starting with the DCC, there was this broad community conversation of, now that these transit vehicles are gone, what can we do in the space? Let me move. Hold on. There we go. So DCC facilitated a lot of different discussions with a lot of different agencies, and those were super important, as well as the bid, the business industry, the business associations, as well as some neighborhood and campus area residents. Um, because it's really important before you start changing things is understand fully how things are working. How it works from a traffic engineering perspective in terms of bikes and pedestrian, how it works from street vending, how we pick up the garbage and plow the snow, how that street needs to work for a police response or in a fire. We have to be able to maintain those services, and any change needs to work with that perspective. So I'm going to highlight some of our quick lessons learned. um, so first, we know that the street's in really good condition and the city is not made of money. So we are not in this particular experiment, we're not working with any change to the curbs or the design. So unsurprisingly, when a street doesn't get a lot of use, there's not a lot of wear and tear. So we're really thinking about, particularly in 24, what we can do creatively with kind of a low budget, low budget, no construction kind of idea. We also know, as I mentioned, we need to keep this open to police and fire at all times. So for many places, State Street is a front and only door. We need to be able to get vehicles, emergency vehicles. So thinking about how it would work with the turning radius of a fire truck. How does an ambulance get through there? Also, not just the first fire truck in a response, how does that third and fourth fire truck get to a spot in case of an emergency or a fire? And we still need to plow the snow. We still need to pick up the trash. We still need to get into the street to plant trees. And that does require some level of vehicles being on the street. We also know that bike and pedestrian accommodations are super important, as well as those for individuals with mobility impairments, such as being in a wheelchair. Right now, um, there's only curb cuts at the ends of the blocks. So if you are in a wheelchair and you want to cross the street to go to a different retailer or business, you have to go to the end of the block. That's really not a great outcome. We also know that bikes and pedestrians kind of do their own thing in the space, and making sure that we're really thoughtful about how those mix together or don't mix together is something that we are working very closely, making sure that we're not creating an environment that's uncomfortable for any mode of transportation. And also businesses and deliveries, obviously super important. The servicing of the street, how businesses get their goods and services to sell. Also, how can business sell their items online? We learned from a lot of comments that it's not just inbound deliveries, it's outbound deliveries for a lot of e-commerce for that. And as a result, shipping is kind of unpredictable. Deliveries come when they come. And we need to be conscious of that because we certainly aren't doing this to create challenges for our business community. We also know that there's residents on the street and residents move in and out. And a lot of times that happens in August, but a lot of times there's subleases, there's a lot of off schedule stuff. We need to be really thoughtful about how people just live in a space. And you can't pull a moving truck up to move if the street is fully closed. Um, so we talked through a lot of these issues. And in August, Alder Bennett introduced a resolution to direct staff to proceed with this experimental closure in 24. And we're kind of going through that process now. This was approved. It's got a fair amount of attention so far, and we're working through some of those issues, kind of as staff, as I mentioned, trying to figure out that best fit for 24. And just to recap the area we're talking about, it really is kind of from that Gorham frontage, that's probably the highest visibility. The Gilman-Gorman or the Gilman-Broome intersection is also in play, and extending it really down to Hawthorne Court. So we had originally thought we'd go to Lake, but with the Lake Street Garage reconstruction, we do know that there's going to need to be vehicular access there. So we probably aren't going all the way to Lake. Just a couple note. The cross traffic is going to stay open. We're not closing that at any time, although we do understand that sometimes police close those on particularly active weekend evenings. But just want to take a quick look at the existing condition. So this is largely the condition that we're working with. So 66 feet building face to building face. We have about an 8-foot mainline sidewalk, and then the terrace space where we have all the sidewalk cafes, street furniture, kind of the amenities. About 22 feet of roadway. So this very closely resembles the fire lane. So we have very limited ability to put anything in the street. We need to maintain that for fire purposes and emergency access. The fire trucks, their outriggers go 20 feet. And so it just becomes very, very challenging to put things in. We do have some narrow opportunities, but this is largely kind of what we're working in for the short term. So we started kind of a staff brainstorming exercise about what we can and can't do, understanding these limitations. So this is just a diagram that we use to kind of illustrate some concepts. So a couple things that we wanted to think about first is how we control access. And we thought, having some level of planters at the ends, instead of barricades, that does a couple things for us. First, it far more attractive than a barricade. It allows us to be a little more porous, so it lets us space those so bikes can come through the space without having to go all the way around. It effectively kind of, markates almost like a bike lane coming through. And also, it does begin to have a larger vehicular, visual and physical presence. So a car can relatively easily drive through a barricade. Driving through a 2,000-pound planter full of soil and plants is a different story. And so from a physical as well as perceived safety issue, these can be a pretty significant upgrade. Looking at some gateway elements at the end of the blocks to call out that these are kind of a special place. And some street painting. This is something we're kind of looking at how we can, create an identity, just some interesting character. This is just kind of a exploring an idea. And last kind of major feature we were looking at is possibly, how can we put, what are other visual cues that the street is a public space that's designed for people, the roadway? So we're looking at adding some benches and some features facing into the street. Because if the benches are facing into the street, again, it's kind of reinforcing that this is an okay space to be. And it's really where we want people to be. It's okay that there will be times that cars and pedestrians and cyclists coexist in a space. But it's visual cues to really slow traffic. So as we got through this, we kind of landed on this branding of Flock to State. It was, kind of a proximity to Bascom Hill. And again, this is just something that we're thinking about for 24. We don't know if this is a permanent branding, but we wanted something that was, kind of Instagram worthy, right? How people would go down, take a selfie, post something on online and kind of create that vibe. And so thinking about things that we can do to create that kind of a buzz, again, that's bringing people to State Street, is something that we wanted to explore a little further. So this is kind of a graphic of how that might work. You can kind of see some planters at the ends of the blocks. These are not the greatest renderings. This is kind of what we have with what we had available. Some additional planters on the ends, and some gateway elements, again, kind of leaning into that flamingo branding. So you might obviously notice a difference in the street painting from that initial diagram. This is actually kind of an idea that came from kind of some conversations with other city staff. So we thought, first of all, that, an elaborate street painting might be kind of challenging with weather. My son is home from MMSD today, so he might peek into the meeting just in case you see a face right here. So we thought maybe a stencil might be just a little more, it's better risk management if it's something we can control. The other idea then was, hey, if we're going to do stencils, this is something that we can get the community to come down. That's my son, Ian. He is saying hi, and now he's hiding. So what a great kickoff to a this experiment on State Street is saying, hey, come down to State. We'll have paintbrushes. We'll have paint.
I live in the States.
How, uh,
Why do I have to calm
okay,
down?
okay. Thank you, Ian. Um, come down the street, help us create this environment that's going to want to bring people together. And so that's kind of our idea. We're targeting a graduation weekend kickoff because we know there's already going to be tons of people on State. And so what a great time to kick off this experiment. So as I mentioned, again, kind of that branding about stenciling, and this could be an idea of how that works. So trying to get people again involved with that kind of creating that place. Along with that, again, kind of some of those gateway elements. We don't know exactly what these are going to look like. We're working with our partners in the Madison, Carr and Wolf, our staff for the Madison Arts Commission, seeing what we can do creatively. Again, not on something that doesn't have a ton of budget, that we have our sources. We could possibly use TIF, maybe some room tax money. Low cost, high impact. That's kind of what we're going for in 24.
Picture.
So the couple other public art opportunities, we're looking at how we can bring music and other kind of placemaking elements into the space. So if there's busking stations, again, creating that environment, those little things that bring people into the space, that enhance that space with public music. We're trying to do an easy permit sign up. So we have these defined spaces and kind of these defined hours of operations that musicians can come and sign up really easy, go into the space, and again, enliven that with kind of their unique the character. So we also know, as I mentioned earlier, we can't do this alone. So we don't have the capacity as a city to manage and create events. We can work to create the furniture, get those things in the right spot. We can work to control access to the street. But we are not putting on Live on King. We want to rely on our community partners to do that for us, or do that in partnership. We want to make the space available, but this city, we are not event planners. I do what I can, but I know there are people that do it far better than what we can do in the time we have. And so what does it also mean to be a closure? And so that has kind of been a recurring theme, and we just want to be very clear with what that means. So it really is a time that the street is really only open to bikes, pedestrians, emergency vehicles, and paratransit. So closed to basically everything. So right now there is a very limited amount of traffic on State Street. There is deliveries, there is building services. There is some level of taxi service that can happen at late at night. Those would all be, we're trying to find the times that it works to have those vehicles on State Street, and times that it's really focused on pedestrian and bikes to create that really pedestrian mall. Because it doesn't really create the pedestrian mall character if you have a taxi driving through it, when we're really focused on that experiential time. So we are also looking at how we can minimize those impacts when there is a closure. So maintaining loading zones on cross streets or other things. We know that there's going to be unforeseen situations that arise, and we don't want to be so rigid to say, this isn't going to work. We certainly want to understand those and find solutions to address those concerns. So when this closure would occur is something that we are definitely getting feedback on. We don't know exactly when this is going to be. And we also know that we can't make that decision alone, because it has to come in partnership with the business community and in partnership with the neighborhood residents. So as you may know, there is an existing delivery prohibition between 11:30 and 1:30. That's not always enforced. We're looking at how we can enforce that better, but it does kind of create a starting point. And so we can think maybe it's, the immediate options that we see, and these are not an exclusive list, is, having a closure just be on the weekends. It could be during the week, but maybe in the evening time. So maybe after 4 or 5 to kind of capture people getting off of work, or really when those activity levels are highest on on State Street. It could be after the start of that delivery prohibition. So something where we'd allow deliveries and service just in the morning, but not during other times of the day. And again, we don't know exactly what this is. We're certainly looking for feedback from the business community. We have some ideas about maybe there's data that we can understand exactly when those areas are most active and target the closures to when we have the most people there, because it doesn't make sense to have a street closure if it's not going to be active. And so we've definitely used the term experiment a lot, and sometimes that feels like it's kind of a clunky term, but it really is what we are doing. And so an experiment is something where we try something, we measure it, and then we report back. And so this is a experiment for 24. It is only for 24 at this time. But part of the resolution that was adopted directing staff to do this said we have to measure the outcomes. We have to measure the activity and report back to council. So we do this with a couple ways. This is my daughter, Elise, too. She's saying hi. So I'll get you breakfast in just a minute. So we plan to do this a couple different ways. We definitely want to have surveys with QR codes kind of in the space. So we can get an understanding about how people are experiencing the space and what it feels like to be there. We also intend to do a business survey, understanding business perspectives. The bid helped us do a lot, kind of door to door with some of those business surveys with our initial survey. We also intend to partner with the bid to use their placer data, which is anonymized cell phone data, which helps us track activity levels throughout the corridor. The great thing about this is that it tracks retroactively, so there's past data, so we can compare exactly what we expect to see in the summer to past data, say, did this make a change? Is it about the same? What does that look like? What does that information look like kind of collectively? And so our next steps is we are continue to have some input meetings. And again, I really appreciate the invitation to kind of talk to more people. We always want to make ourselves available. If there's a group, we are happy to give additional presentations and understand new perspectives. So we are in the process of revising and kind of finalizing this design. Because of furniture order lead time, we'll probably be ordering furniture relatively soon. Determining that hours of operation, again, that's kind of key. We have a little bit more time with that because that doesn't need to be really finalized until the street is closed. We do have to go back through a approval process of this design from Common Council again. Some of the boards, commissions, and committees that authorize this want to see it again. So DCC will be a big review agency, as well as Transportation Commission and ultimately Council. We have a lot of coordination to do with artists, both in terms of creating stencils, street painting, some of those gateway elements. That's all in process right now. And I want to say a big thank you to Rebecca Kinnair and Karen Wolf for kind of spearheading those efforts right now. And so that's kind of where we're at. You know, we've asked some questions, kind of what excites you about this? What are your concerns? Ideas for activation and partnership. And all these questions are on the link that's there, surveymonkey.com/r/flock2state, or you can use a QR code to go to our survey to get information. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, Dan, thank you for the excellent presentation. This was very informative. Where we are, what we're doing to move forward. We really appreciate. There is some good activity in the chat, but also if people have questions, please use the raise hand function so I can see. But first question is from Ted Gunderson, who asks about lighting as a means to show this is a community space, overhead or lighting the street, excuse me, with varying colors. Dan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great idea. You know, we've definitely heard over the years that, you know, kind of the festival lights going across the street is something that would just be a great character building thing. And I do agree. Like, you think about some of the, like, I was just in Denver, and I can't remember what street it is, kind of in their historic district, Laramie Square, kind of that character area, right? Unfortunately, we cannot do that. there's a lot of concern with aerial access and the fire trucks kind of raising a ladder there, getting caught. The one thing that fire department has brought up that I think is really a great point is that while fire trucks look big and tough, it's really a machine to fight a fire. And those machines have kind of weak points, particularly like a wiring harness in the ladder. And we don't want to get a fire truck stuck and not doing its purpose because we decided to try to plow through something. So we are looking at alternatives. We can definitely do lighting in the terrace and in the buildings. We're working on repairing and replacing the kind of the string lights on our pedestrian poles. The vendor that originally created those has, of course, gone out of business. So sourcing those is a little more challenging, but it is something that we are exploring. And again, this is a kind of an in-process draft right now, and we're certainly open to new ideas.
Or my other question is like, in lieu of like the stencil and the street art thing, like, I go into my car and it projects down onto the ground that, my logo of my car. I mean, couldn't we do something like that just from a light pole that currently
Yeah.
exists? And you could change that for Madison Night Market or, Shine On. You could change that as the seasons occur.
That's a great idea, and it's not something that we thought about, but it's certainly something that we could look into. Yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're just going to get to the questions in the chat, then we'll get to Nick. I do want to note, just to reemphasize what Dan said about fire. People forget that a lot of those buildings on State Street are wood frame construction. They're turn of the century, non-sprinkled buildings. So fire, life, and safety is key to this area. Comments from Susan, I just want to go over those in the chat. Hope the city can look at opportunities more than focus on limitations. There are always ways to work around deliveries and the need for fire trucks. This is a project that has needed to happen for decades, and it is about users and uses. And people are already using it as a mall at the bottom of the blocks. Thanks, terrific idea. This is why we're working with the bid. I think that was a comment about the programming at the time. And then, things about, she's dreamed about this for decades. So thank you. Lighting is key. All right. So we're going to go next to our friend Nick, and then after Nick, Matt.
Yeah, I guess this is a question kind of also for Matt with the bid, Jason with Downtown Madison Inc. But recently with the announcement of the closing of the Lake Street lot on December 27th, I saw a lot of, I don't know, like fear or frustration that wasn't necessarily communicated super well among a very specific audience of people that use it to go to events at the Hamill Music Center and Memorial Union. And I guess I'm just curious about, one, how do all stakeholders communicate that? And two, how to make sure that understanding that at least like some limited parking, or perceived parking limitation is taken into account when considering the success or not of this project, knowing that for some people, they're not going to want to come to this 400 to 600 block of State Street for the perceived reason that they're not going to be able to park downtown.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly answer that question, parts of that question. So yes, no, 100%. I mean, the area, it's not going to be apples to apples in comparison because you have this large parking structure that will be down and there will be construction. And I commend Dan and the team for not extending it that far because that will be a construction zone on Lake Street. I cannot answer the question from Hamill, but I can answer the question from the union. So I do serve on and Susan is on it as well, the union advisory board for the Wisconsin Union. And we had the discussion and they're very aware of that. They understand that is a big feeder lot for them. Their library lot fills very quickly. And so Lake Street becomes, I wouldn't say it was necessarily the primary ramp, but pretty close to the primary ramp. And so we have had discussions with them. They are aware that this is happening and they are taking steps, particularly before next summer when they're busiest, to mitigate any negative effects for that. But
yeah,
Hamill, I don't know about Hamill. That's a great question.
No, of course. And I think just that, right, just the perception of it. I know that there was a lot of comments in the Facebook thread of like 150 comments about like, that's my favorite lot. I'm not going to come, like that's how I park to go down to Library Mall. And to be able to communicate as everyone that other lots do exist, whether it's Granger, whether it's Francis, etc. But that's some work that really needs to be done between now and May.
excellent point. We started with the team at the Union, but we need
Yep.
to do this with all the businesses around that area because there actually is still a good amount of parking. But I'm more than anyone aware that people are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And so you want to be able to make sure that they feel like they can become welcome. We had Matt. I don't know if you took your hand down, but then
No,
Matt.
yeah, I had a couple comments.
Yeah.
The thing obviously starts to take your hand down if you make any kind of a noise. That's an annoying new
Oh,
feature.
there we go. You're up. You're up.
Dan, first of all, thank you for this presentation at the DMI board meeting yesterday. Peggy and Jason and I, all talked quite glowingly about this specific presentation that you've given to several stakeholders and stakeholder groups in the past few weeks. And everything is obviously really well thought out. And I think that, your team is thinking a lot about some of the business issues that can come up, and I know that that's really important for everybody in the bid in particular. Specifically, how many responses are you at right now? And this has been all over the public. So, how many survey responses do you have right now?
Let me. I can check. It was over 250 earlier, so we're getting pretty good response.
So everybody on this call is obviously really interested in this project. So I would encourage everybody to get this out to your communities as much as possible. 250 responses is, in my opinion, a good start, but there's a lot of people that we want to hear from. So please continue to push this out. It's a quick survey, and it's important that we hear from everybody as much as possible. And then I just want to say, with regard to programming, it's something that we're already talking a lot about internally. It's going to be a big part of our planning and discussions in early January. We already have some great ideas that we're focused on, but I wanted to just mention that obviously Peace Park and the visitor center are huge assets in this experiment, and I think we're going to be looking not only to program everything that we can possibly on the street, but I think that those two particular spaces are going to give us some nice opportunities to do things, to bring events specifically to those areas in a much more fulsome way than currently happens. And so just wanted to mention that. And then the culture collective space also, which falls within, I believe, the boundaries of this project, I think is something that we can try to hopefully revive a little bit more and get some businesses in there and some vendors in there that can also use this project as a catalyst to help get out onto the street and do some cool things.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. I do also want to acknowledge Emily, one of the leaders of the Overture Center, is here as well. Dan, I just want to make sure a great partner on State Street. Peggy, you're up next.
Thank you. And thanks to Dan and his children. I know we're pushing off breakfast here. And just so everybody knows, Dan's off today and chose to come in. That's how much this means to him and to the city. And I think that's worth noting. My marketing background always says when you put something out there and you try something, you need to have measurable results. And so my question is, I know we're going to, do this as an experiment. How do we know, what numbers are we going to measure the success by? Because, and the other second reason I want to know that is because as a community, right, reaching that goal will help bring us together. So is it possible, if we don't have them yet, can we get the measurable goals ahead of time so we all know what we're shooting for?
That's a great comment. And so we haven't really thought about benchmarks yet. We thought about methods and how we would measure it, but I don't know if we've set a target. Are we looking for 20% more people on State Street? I don't know if that's achievable. We look at kind of those peak flows of everybody. It's kind of be the events, right? People come to State for the night market. They're there for the weekends. There's there's the normal crowds, but those peaks are really, they're things that we as a community are attending when we're coming together as a city, as visitors, as residents, as business owners. So I think that's That is a really great point. It's not something we thought about. We really thought, we're grateful that the bid has agreed to help us with the placer data because that's going to give us really good counts. And that is kind of our biggest, I think, our first metric. What exactly does that look like? I don't know. The challenge, I think, is we have 20 alders that may have 20 different definitions of what success is. And so we're not entirely sure defining that number early is going to be practical. There's other metrics that we definitely want to look at. In our early survey that we put out in April, when we asked the business community if there's a willingness to share kind of their business, their sales data. What we heard is probably isn't a desire to share their actual sales numbers, but we do want to know, we will probably ask again, how has this experiment change, have you perceived a positive increase from it from the business perspective? Is it neutral? Is it negative? We will probably just leave it in terms of great. Hello, Elise.
Can you now?
I will make you breakfast soon. They also know where the granola bars are and the yogurt, so they have been fed. They just want me to feed them. So parents know what I'm talking about, right? So yeah, so we're working through that. We definitely, we want to present a menu of metrics because people will define success differently. And again, it's interesting because this is a 2024 experiment. We're definitely working with the understanding that we believe it's going to be successful. We believe it, and we have to use these metrics as demonstrating success rather than, is this going to be a good thing? I think once we prove that it's successful, there are some things that we think about in terms of what is the short-term change, what is the long-term change. As I mentioned, in the back of my mind, there's a list of more permanent improvements that we can consider once we demonstrate that this is a successful idea. Things like mid-block crossings for people in wheelchair. Maybe we do some curb changes at the ends of the street. Maybe it's, retractable bollards. Maybe it's a more enhanced lighting program on those streets. Those are larger capital expenses that are really beyond the scope of what we can do in this kind of experiment year. But it's important to get those lessons learned in the experiment so we're not going through and spending a lot of money on something that we thought we got right, but it turns out we were just way off. So that was a long-winded, meandering answer that I think addressed your question and then took a tangent.
Excellent. One quick note, we certainly have worked, and Matt and I can help you with this. There are businesses that we've seen on State Street that are willing to give revenue change numbers. And so we know who those are. And so we can certainly help there.
Yeah, I mean, even just like a plus minus neutral.
Correct. Like we're up 5% or 10% or whatever.
That's helpful for us to know. I mean, I think everybody thinks, we certainly think it's not going to be negative, but putting a number on it is always a plus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to just say thank you for coming at this from a positive angle to say we think this is going to be a success. I think that is a statement of intent. And we appreciate that significantly. And I also want to make sure to couple this. The group remembers that the city, including Dan and the team, we're going through an experiment, hopefully starting next year, should be starting next year, of doing the public-private strategic visioning for the entire part of the downtown, but also including this area. So when you take this experiment, this together, we can start to look at the permanent changes that Dan was just talking about. Because at some point, the road will have to be redone, right? You can shallow out curbs and bollards, not this year, totally understand that. But in the future, that is a possibility, whenever that is. So we want to be ready for that.
And there's always great public space lessons learned. So we know what, we can think about the things that we're exploring for State Street. How might that be relevant to the Mifflin Plaza adjacent to the Wisconsin History Center? All those things where we have these really pedestrian-oriented spaces, from a design perspective, they all have unique challenges and opportunities. But there's a lot of commonalities between how we use them and how we foster a great public space. And it starts really, number one, with people, because people don't like to go to empty spaces. They like to go to where people are. And like, how do we build those spaces to really maximize the amount of people in those spaces? Because Yogi's Bear is right. No one goes there. It's too crowded. And that's kind of what we're shooting for. Well, the second part, not the first, but.
I forgot that one. That is a good one. I'm going to use that one. I don't mind stealing that in a presentation. More questions for Dan. If not, he can commence with creation of breakfast.
Yeah, Dan, feed your kids.
Wow. Here he does. Takes his day off.
So I'm gonna talk to Bill when I get back. So how is that DMI? Oh, well, they chased me out of the room because my kids need to be fed. So that was the overarching feedback is shut your computer.
Well, to be fair, I am a parent as well, but I was feeding with a bottle. So it's a lot easier to do what I did this morning than what you did. Yes. I didn't have to make pancakes.
Oh.
Any last questions for Dan?
Oh, wait, one thing
Yeah.
circle back to porch light pancake mix. Was it that one?
Oh my God, it is so good. Make this full circle. Their pancake mix is ridiculously good. We have one more question here in the chat though, Dan, it looks like from Susan. How can you can start by looking at users and uses. How are the people using the space right now? Why are they looking at why are they looking for in terms of uses?
What are they looking for?
That's what I thought. Okay, I think I automatically
I
translated
say that
What are
wrong.
they looking for in terms of uses and not existing uses? Yes.
Yeah, Dan, it was just practices. I think I sent you a separate message.
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm quite passionate about this whole thing. So, so thank you everyone for the patience with all the stuff in the chat. Because the process that we used worked extremely well with Lisa Link Park. You can check with Bill Fruline about that too. And Brad Murphy was part of it, but of course he's not, on your staff anymore. He's retired, but it works so well. And it's about activating it too, which is one of the reasons we have a bid, which is amazing because these wonderful spaces, when you create them for people and based on users and uses, somebody needs to activate them. So anyway, I'm so excited about this and I'd like to help be involved in any way that I can. This is way overdue, I think. It doesn't matter because things happen when they happen. The timing is right now. And I ride my bike up State Street almost every day. And that bottom area is already being used differently. People have taken it over. It's almost like get rid of those curbs. They're already using it as an open space. So what is that telling you? It's telling you about the users. You know this stuff because you're a planner. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate the enthusiasm. Great ideas and great places don't happen from indifference.
No.
So it's about building, we have very limited public spaces, right? State Street is one of our great public spaces in the city. And we're not growing into the lake.
Right.
We have these limited opportunities, and as our population continues to grow, particularly in the downtown area, we need to take every opportunity we can to make these just dynamic and incredible places. And that, there's some stuff that we can do within the right of way. Part of that is the business mix on the side, but it's some of that is event creation, and it's all those things working together collectively that has to happen for State Street to continue to be the destination, the one street. If you ask one I guess if you ask two people from if you ask people from outside Madison, name two streets, it would probably be State and Willie.
Right.
So,
or if you meet somebody somewhere outside of the state that went to school here or something, they'll, oh yeah, State Street. Oh my God, State Street. It's always about their memories on State Street. And of course, Union, but State Street, which is connected.
There's a reason when, the football games or the basketball games get TV coverage that, the cameras aren't showing Odana. I don't want to pick on Odana, but you guys know what I mean, right?
Come on, I live off Odana. It's a very
We got it.
Hey, I live on Odana. Come on.
He actually, that's true. We're neighbors. And
I picked on. All right, now I'm regretting.
I don't even ride my bike on Odana.
Oh, it's a great street. We're gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm gonna
Go
save you, Dan.
Go
Yes.
ahead, Dan. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you
Yeah,
for the
thank
work that
you.
you're doing.
This
Thank
is
you.
so exciting.